Welcome back. This week we are going to focus on the hot topic in the news because, well, for the last 8 months, the primary hot topic has been COVID, and so it hasn't changed this week. This week we're going to talk about COVID, but the COVID vaccine. Over the last couple of weeks, we've received some really good news as it relates to a COVID vaccine. But of course, with all good news comes controversy. So we're going to talk a little bit about that controversy because it has turned into a psychological discussion.
Right. 2020 is the year of yes, but. It's just like no matter what happens, it's yes, we had an election, but yes, we have, and now it's yes, we have a vaccine, but it's in the news because on December the 10th, we want to talk about the issues surrounding that vaccine,
right?
Because it's not I think everybody must have assumed that once we get the vaccine, we vaccinate everybody and the pandemic's going to be over. Okay. So it's far more complicated than that.
Right. And we're going to try to resist talking of, going down the whole line of anti-vaccine situation, because that is a completely different discussion. We've talked about that on the podcast before. And so we're not going to talk about it from that perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And so, those of you who may have been looking for something like that, that's not what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, this is not an anti-vaccination diatribe. That is a separate topic.
Right.
This is about the vaccine we've all been waiting for, that we've been waiting for all year. And now it's here. It's been approved by the Food and Drug Administration. But now there are a number of issues surrounding the vaccine that we are now confronting us. Okay, and one of them is safety. Everybody's concerned about the safety. Should I get it? Is it harmful? Is Bill Gates somehow involved? Those sorts of issues. But first issue is safety. Second issue is, will people agree? And there are certain attitudes about this vaccine in particular, and how people are approaching it. So what we wanted to do was sort of talk about not the medical or the distribution aspects of this, but the psychology that around this vaccine, about whether or not you're going to take the vaccine.
Right, absolutely. And that's why we're making sure that we emphasize that we're not talking about it from an anti-vaccine perspective, because the numbers of individuals who are concerned or maybe even against this particular vaccine is far higher, far greater than the numbers associated with anti-vaccines.
Right.
Anti-vaccines, those who are against vaccinating, our babies and toddlers because of concerns related to development and all that, that's a relatively small group of individuals, as compared to almost 50% of Americans are saying that they're really concerned and may not accept a vaccine for COVID.
Nowhere near 50% of parents are reluctant to have their children immunized. But we're looking at numbers approaching 50% at least, and that may be an underestimate, of people who are at least reluctant or hesitant to agree to get this vaccine. And so the first issue is safety, and the question is, did the FDA rush through this thing just to get the vaccine out there? And there's a great article written by a virologist from Michigan, and in it she reminds us that on December the 10th, there was an FDA advisory council that voted 17 of 22 members who voted yes. And the question was, based on the totality of scientific evidence, do the benefits outweigh the risks for individuals 16 years old? So that's the question that the FDA has to answer.
Right. The
And
benefits over the risks for this particular vaccine, for Pfizer's particular vaccine.
right, we're all hearing about the Pfizer vaccine, okay? And this is about, because it's been the first, I guess Pfizer's and Moderna's are going to be the first two that are approved. Well, Pfizer's, the advisory committee on December the 10th said that, and on December the 12th, the full FDA gave its approval.
Right.
So now this vaccine, which has already been manufactured, now can be distributed. Okay,
Right.
now it'll be sent out. Now, to give you, I mean, the logistics of this are going to be impressive and enormous, because we're talking about millions of samples have to be sent out. And you've all heard about the cold temperature. It has to be at 94 below zero. So there is that cooling problem and the distribution problem. England is starting now. England approved it last week, and they've started their distribution. And it's going to be a massive undertaking. I mean, you're talking about immunizing millions of people, and it's a two-part vaccine. You have to get 2 shots, not 1. So there's that also, that a person may get the first shot, not the second shot, and they're still not safe. So the council has said, no, this is safe. But during that meeting, and the reason this woman wrote this article is because people are questioning the transparency of the process.
Right.
And she wrote the article to say, this is a transparent process.
Right.
And at the end of the meeting, it was a 9-hour meeting, and there was a 1-hour time for any dissent or comments to be made.
Public.
And so even people who were opposed to it had an opportunity to express their opposition and their concerns. So this was an open process.
Right, and this was a public presentation, and so questions were open to the public. Like, anybody could have watched this. Anyone could have had the opportunity to ask questions.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't restricted to FDA or people, scientific community in general. It was anyone could ask questions.
Right. And one of the questioners happened to be a representative from the National Vaccine Information Center, which sounds like should be an NIH, like a government agency of some sort.
Right.
And actually, it is the lobbying group that promotes what they call educated decision making. But actually what it is it's the anti-vax movement. And there was a wonderful program last week reported an in-depth analysis of this. This is an organization whose sole mission is to discredit and raise questions about vaccinations. Okay, so but again, the anti-vax group was given a voice. So it's not like nobody's talking. That they had their say, and they raised their questions,
which is important. And before anyone jumps up and says, well, I thought you weren't going to talk about anti-vaccines or anti-vax movement, or that we're disparaging. Not in any way.
No.
It's important, as you said, that they have a voice as well, because that is a group of people who look into this and are very concerned about our safety and what it means, what vaccines can do to us and things. And so it is important that they have the opportunity to ask questions and take part in this process.
Right. Yeah. And so they ask what are really legitimate scientific questions. Who's included in the trial? Did we include everybody? Are you sure you did due diligence? So they raised what we would call devil's advocate kind of questions. I want to make sure that you guys have considered everything. And so, not in a confrontational way, but this woman said, let me answer your questions. They're legitimate questions. Let me answer your questions. And the way she did it,
the author said, let me answer your questions.
Right. The author of this piece that we have posted. And so she said, let me answer your questions. And in the process, she explained the 3 phases of an FDA trial, which I thought would be very interesting for our audience to see how these decisions are made. You hear about, well, we're in phase 2 and we're in phase 1, and what do those phases mean? So this is, I think, useful information
Yep.
for all of us. A phase 1 trial is designed simply to see if this is safe.
Right.
Is this product safe? Does it hurt people? Is there anything that could go wrong? And the question that they ask is, how high a dose is safe?
Right.
How high a dose in this drug is safe? So what they do is they get a group of volunteers. I'd like to talk to that group.
Well, and it's important to say that these phases, this isn't where they started.
No.
When I remember, when we, back in another lifetime, when we worked at the university, and we were part of some of these kinds of studies, not particular vaccines, but medication.
Drug studies, right?
These phases, phase 1, 2, and 3, that we're going to talk about now, came after all of the bench work. And by bench work, we're talking about, looking at the virus in a petri dish and subjecting it to different things and seeing how it responds, and in some ways then going to animal tissue and looking at it from a in a very sequential stepwise process. And once it gets through all of that and is deemed safe, then they get to human trials.
Right. And human trials is a huge step.
Absolutely.
You have to do a lot of work before you get to human trials. I mean,
right. There are a lot of benchmarks that have to be met before you can try it with the first human.
That's right. That's right. So we knew the drug probably wasn't going to kill anybody. There were probably because we had tested it on all sorts of animals.
Right.
And animals are not that, we're not that different genetically. Okay.
Right.
There's only a few genes that separate us from the great apes. And so if it doesn't kill them, it's unlikely, but that's why you have this process. So you're right. The science, the basic science had all been done before we got to phase 1.
Right. Yeah. And they're pretty sure that it wasn't going to kill animals before it got to the animal part.
Right. Exactly.
Because you can't, you have to go through IACUC and all of these other agencies to make sure that you're treating the animals in the research, that you're treating them humanely and not subjecting them to undue distress.
Right. You couldn't do something where you just might kill a bunch of animals. They're not going to give permission for that either.
Right.
And then PETA wouldn't stand for that. So there are these checks and balances in this process.
Yeah.
When you get to phase 1 of this drug or this vaccine and most drugs is on very healthy volunteers.
Right.
And of course, the obvious reason is we want to make sure that there are no underlying medical conditions that might have influenced a person's response to that. I don't have allergies. I'm not sick. I don't have asthma. So you pick healthy volunteers where there's no chance that something else might be contributing to the drug effects. Okay. So you make sure that the drug is safe at a certain dose.
Right.
Okay. What's the top end of this? If you look up medications, there's always a dose. This range to this range.
Right.
So
and we want to look at the therapeutic dose. And so what is the lowest dose we can give that's effective, and what is the highest dose that you can give before you start getting into detrimental set of side effects?
That's right. Where do the side effects really begin? At what dose? Okay, so you have this range. I want to give as little as possible, but as much as needed to be effective. Okay,
right.
So that's phase 1. Phase 2 is phase 2 is to see if the drug is effective. So phase 1 is it safe and at what dose? Phase 2 is, does it work? And is it better than anything else that we have? Okay. So the phase 2 trial is it effective? Does it work? Okay. Then we determine that. Okay. Then the phase 3 trial is, does it work better than the standard of care we currently have?
Right.
Like aspirin. Aspirin works very well for pain. So if somebody wants to come out with another drug, the question at phase 3 would be, is this better than the standard of care that we currently have?
Right.
Okay. Right. Now, the interesting thing about the phase 3 trial is that typically when you develop a drug, At phase 3, you use several hundred participants.
Right.
With this vaccine, they used 40,000 participants. So that answers the question of, are you sure you tested this on enough people?
Right.
You know, we know it works on these several hundred people, but we have a vaccine that they tested on 40,000 people. Right. And so we know that it's safe, phase 1, we know that it works, phase 2, and we know that it works on a broad range of people at phase 3, because
right.
we tested 40,000, not several hundred.
Right, it's better than the standard of care.
That's right.
And remember that our current standard of care is basically social distancing.
That's right. We don't really have anything like this. Right. So that's why this got emergency approval, because right now we don't have anything.
Right.
Okay? So this is better than anything else because it's the only thing we have.
Right. So if this vaccine has made it through these 3 phases successfully and got to the point where the FDA would even say, yes, you know, we made it through, and based upon the data collected in these 3 phases, mm-hmm. it's approved for distribution.
Right.
You know, when we then start to question, when people start to then, you know, throw out these questions as to the safety and efficacy, it is almost an intentional attempt, right, to raise concern and to get people to not trust the science, mm-hmm. Because the science has demonstrated this already.
Right.
And so, you know, we start getting into that whole argument of alternative facts and things like that we've talked about, you know, many times before.
Right.
But here we are in a perfect concrete example of how that's being used again, mm-hmm. to make people hesitant to do something that has been demonstrated to be pretty effective.
Right. Yeah. This article is a good example. The FDA is a very transparent process. This stuff doesn't happen behind, right, in secret. Okay. It's we know what happened in phase 1. Many people were involved in phase 1. You can't get everybody to collude and to be deceptive. Phase 2 was a completely open trial. Phase 3 involved 40,000 participants and thousands of professionals. You can't get that number of people to collude and to keep a secret. Okay. Right. It is a transparent process. We know what happened at each phase. We know it's safe. We know it works. And we know it's effective. So to question the science is really to introduce mistrust in the scientific process, in the scientific evidence. The science is very clear. Open process, very clear that it works, very clear that it's safe. So anybody who raises questions now, they're really just trying to, right, raise people's suspicion that there's something wrong with the scientific evidence. And let's face it, we've been through a period in the last few years where science has been questioned, scientific evidence has been questioned, and people have many people in our country now are suspicious of science and scientists. Look at all the controversy surrounding Dr. Fauci. You know, he's been a world leader for 40 or 50 years, and now suddenly he's been discredited. Right. That sort of thing is what's being raised here, is that we have a mistrust of scientific evidence. This is the science that we have, okay? This is what we know. This is the science that we have. So if we don't do anything, let's say the decision is made to maintain the status quo. Let's not have the vaccine, all right? To do nothing is still a policy decision. Sure. I've decided to do nothing, and that's my policy. That's still a policy decision. That means if I do nothing, that means that many more thousands of people are going to die of this disease. If you open up any news program right now, not any news program, most news programs right now, you will see South Korea, record numbers, Japan, record numbers, Germany, record numbers. It's country after country after country has record numbers of cases. Just as was predicted, the winter has brought on a surge in cases, okay? And so if we don't do something, Many thousands of people are going to die. Hospitals are going to fill up. They are beginning to fill up around the country, and economies are going to be devastated. Okay, so to do nothing is a policy decision. So we have to do something. This is what we have. This is what science has given us. It's a safe vaccine, effective vaccine, and we need to get moving on it and get it to people as soon as possible.
And this kind of leads us very nicely into the sort of the second part of the podcast, and that is, okay, so we have it. It's going to be available for distribution. Are people going to take it?
That becomes the question. We have, the scientists have done their job. Here they have created a vaccine that's safe and effective. Okay. Now the question is, are people going to take it?
And that's why this is where it gets into more of the psychological realm.
Right.
Is the creating the vaccine and testing the vaccine. That's medical science. That's hard science, biology, chemistry. This is getting into human behavior.
Right.
Will people take the vaccine? And we talked before about the idea of herd immunity. Mm-hmm. And again, I think it is important for us to say the likelihood of us gaining herd immunity for COVID-19 is probably pretty small, if it exists at all. We don't even have herd immunity for the flu.
I want you to emphasize what you just said. People talk about, well, we'll have herd immunity. We don't have herd immunity for the common cold.
Right.
Or for any flu that we experience during the wintertime.
Yeah. And every year we're encouraged to take the flu vaccine.
Right.
Because it doesn't carry over from year to year. There are different strands of the flu. And there are different types of coronavirus that we talked about before. So, we need to back off of this idea that we will get herd immunity, and just look at, again, the science and look at what is needed from a public health perspective.
Right.
And that is, why would it be, or why would a person refuse the vaccine? And what would make someone else take the vaccine? Mm-hmm. That gets into human decision making.
Right. So what we have, what this author does in the second piece is, what are people's intentions regarding the vaccine?
Right.
And he lists several studies that were done, several, what do they call those things in public? I don't know what they're called. Anyway, surveys, the survey data. Okay, so we survey large numbers of people and we take a random sample and say, okay, let's talk to 10,000 people and see what they say.
Right.
So the Pew Research Foundation did a study.
This is my favorite set of data, by the way.
What is it?
Pew data.
Pew?
Because they looked at May when it was first hitting, and only 27% said that they either definitely would not take it or probably would not take it.
Right.
Then they redid it in September,
mm-hmm.
and now we're up to almost 50% said that they either definitely would not or probably would not take the vaccine.
Right.
The numbers almost doubled.
Right. And so there was all this excitement about a vaccine, and why did the number of people who said, "No, I don't think I'm going to," why did it double? Well, because doubt was introduced in the ensuing months between May and September, and now you have half of people wondering, is it safe? Is it effective? Should I do it? Should I not do it? I don't trust the government, or I don't trust.
I think that another reason that it probably dipped, though, is because September was just before the holidays.
Mm-hmm.
We started seeing the numbers were decreasing there for a while. And I think that in September, people were like, maybe this isn't going to be so bad. We've got a handle on it. The number of hospitalizations are down. The number of deaths are down. Things started opening up. Kids were going back to school and all that kind of stuff. But by October, and certainly by November, everything started going back up again, and we're starting to hit record numbers. And so it'd be really interesting to see what the numbers say now. There were the CNN poll and then the Gallup poll that we're going to talk about in just a moment that has the numbers a little bit different. But still, we're still talking about a lot of people.
Right. Yeah, because the CNN Gallup said, CNN said in October it was 45%.
Right.
Said they wouldn't, and in Gallup they said 50% said they would, but 50% said no. Okay, right. And by November it was 68% who said. So the numbers are going up, and it's beginning to look like about half the population is expressing real reluctance for the vaccine. And you see that throughout these studies. And the other thing that's alarming is in the specific groups. They looked at people in general, and then they looked at people who are in these high-risk groups.
Right.
So this group of nurses were surveyed, and 34% said, yes, I'll get the vaccine. These are people who are exposed to this on a daily basis. 34% yes, 36% said no, 31%. So it's about a third.
Right.
Yes, I will, no, I won't, and I'm not sure. Healthcare workers in general, 66.5% said, I'm going to delay it. And so most people have this wait and see attitude. I don't think I'm going to do it. Older Americans, another high-risk group, 58% said yes, 28% no, 14. So almost a 50-50 split between, it's a 60-40 split between those who said yes and those who either said no or they weren't sure.
Right. Okay. Yeah, and it's important to note that as with the case with every survey, these are typically underestimates.
That's right.
Because, we can all sit here and say, well, when it becomes available, I will do this. But we know that, again, from psychological research, we know that when we're actually in that situation, our decision-making may be very different.
Because of my age, I'm in one of those high-risk groups. I have asthma too. Okay, so I'm in a high-risk group. So when the virus, I was very excited, and I'm a yes. Okay, I don't mind saying that. I believe the science. I know the process. So I'm not afraid of this vaccine at all. And I believe that vaccination is an important part of our health. But when it comes time to roll up my sleeve, it's a completely different set of circumstances. So right now I'm saying I'm a yes. I'm a very strong yes. I'll be there. I'll be at the front of the line. Yeah. But when I get in my car and drive to the site, that's a very different day.
And so there is an aspect of it being socially desirable.
That's right.
Yes.
In a survey.
Right.
You look at a survey, say, okay, this is my obligation. Then I have to do my part.
Right. But then, again, you have that practical aspect of it. And I think that one of the big concerns is, and I've heard some of this on some news outlets, is that this is going to take effort. It's not like you just go to the doctor and you get the shot.
Right.
That is the ultimate behavior that you have to do. However, what it also means is you have to go back and do a second one. So
you have to do it twice.
You have to do it twice. So if we just say it really simply, if you take it the first time and you have an unpleasant experience because it hurts, because sometimes those shots, it's warm, or it creates muscle weakness, or something that because you're getting the shot in a muscle. If that is uncomfortable, or if it's difficult for you to take time off to go and have it done, you may get the first one, but you may not go back to get the second one. And that's what there's a big concern about that.
Yeah, nobody looks forward to getting a shot. It's one of our great fears, that all kids, am I going to get a shot? None of us like to get a needle. Okay, most of us don't like to get a needle. So there's that initial reluctance. Then you have to get the first shot.
Right.
And there could be some reaction. Okay, you don't know. I mean, it could be painful. You could be tired. There's a little bit of a response. which reduces your motivation then to get the second shot. So again, from a psychological perspective, you're not going to be highly motivated or reinforced to get that second shot. So it is an effortful process. This vaccine, you don't go in and get it sprayed on you. You're going to have 2 injections, probably not going to be pleasant, but it's well worth it. Also, there's always a risk involved.
Sure.
There's a risk involved with getting Novocaine. There's a risk involved in getting an MRI. So nothing is risk-free in this business. And so, yeah, there is a risk involved. But again, given the overwhelming scientific evidence, this is the best hope we have to get control of this virus.
Right. And so it does bring it down to the point that it's not necessarily an availability of the vaccine.
Right.
It's the problem. It's whether or not Americans are going to take it.
That's right. Now, we don't know how other countries might do. Other cultures see this. Germany is facing it. England's facing it. The Japan and China, they will face it. And I think different cultures will experience this differently.
Right.
But in America, this is what we're facing. Okay?
And in this, it wasn't until you framed it as cultures that will handle it differently that this even popped in my mind from what we were talking about prior to starting the podcast. Is in America, we like to differentiate ourselves from many other countries, especially more oppressive countries or countries where the government has much more control over the people. And I think that one of the scariest things as it relates to sort of compliance with a vaccine will be as soon as we hear that there's a country that is mandating or forcing its people to have the vaccine. Because then we begin to see the vaccine as oppressive.
Right.
And as soon as we see the vaccine as oppressive because another dictator or leader of another country is making its citizens take it, we're going to start to see, many Americans will start to see the vaccine as the culprit, not necessarily the government of the other country, but the vaccine as the vehicle.
It reframes the vaccine as a problem rather than a solution in this country. And so we've solved the problem of creating a vaccine. We now have one. We have solved the distribution problem. We know how to get this vaccine. They're going to use tuna. They're going to use the freezers that they use for tuna to get this because they need the same cold temperatures in order to maintain that color. And so the company that makes, I think it's Thermoclad, that makes freezers for keeping tuna frozen from catch to service, that company is going to retrofit. They're going to redesign those coolers so that they handle these tens of thousands of vials of vaccine rather than tuna fish. So again, we have the technology, we have the distribution. The question now is, will Americans take the vaccine? Will they agree to take the vaccine in sufficient numbers?
Right.
Yesterday, Fauci was interviewed and he expressed this concern. He said, my concern now is, will enough people agree to get the vaccine? And that now is the problem facing all of us, facing us I think in every country. But it'll be interesting to see how the UK does, because they're a couple of weeks ahead of us. I think ours is going to start to get distributed next week in our country. So it'll be interesting to see how the compliance rate is in the UK and then what it will be in the US.
And that brings us to the third article that we have posted in the link in the show notes. And that is an article that talks about the four different types of vaccination attitudes. Because it's not just yes or no.
Exactly, right.
What this guy talks about is the idea that there's actually 4 different categories that people can fall into. And depending on the way that the government handles it, depending on the way that healthcare workers, healthcare providers are handling it, a person may fall into one of these different categories.
That's right. And I thought this was really interesting because, as you say, it's not a yes or no. It's not yes, I'm going to do it, or no, I'm not going to do it. That this study was done in Germany, but I think it has implications for most countries. I think most of us are going to fall into one of these four categories.
Right.
And I certainly did. As I went through them, I thought, oh, I guess I fall into this category.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. The first is the anti-vaxxers. They're opposed to vaccination for themselves, and they're opposed to mandatory vaccinations. I mean, this is that anti-vaxxer group. So they're clearly at one end of the spectrum.
Right, and this is again where we know that these numbers, because we were just talking about 50%, they may not get it. This is one of the reasons why we know that it's not just yes or no, because this is about maybe 20% of the population. So there's another 30% that has to be accounted for. If we look at those numbers, so about 22% or so would fall into this anti-vaccine category.
Yeah, it's just a flat no.
Right.
No. And then there's the second group that will get they're not opposed to getting the vaccine personally, but they're opposed to having it mandated.
Right.
That, I think a lot of Americans are probably going to fall into that category, that they may agree to get the vaccine, they just don't want to feel like they have to get it. Right. Like somebody's telling them to do it.
And this is a bigger portion of people. This is about 30%. And now if you take those two, anti-vaccine, and then what this author refers to as anti-duty, like they're against being required to take it. There's your 50%.
There's 50%, right? Mm-hmm. Then the third group he calls free riders.
Right.
I thought that was kind of comical, tongue-in-cheek sort of way of identifying this third group. The free riders they don't want to do it voluntarily. They're reluctant, either they're afraid or reluctant for some reason to get it, but they're in favor of mandatory vaccination because then they'll be forced to do it. Right. So it forces their hand. They don't want to volunteer, but they'll do it because they're forced to do it.
Right.
Not out of a sense of duty,
right,
but because they're forced to do it. I'll put my seatbelt on because it's required by law, not because it's safe, not because it keeps me safe, but because I'll get arrested if I don't.
Right. And this would clearly be a smaller portion of the population, but it's absolutely that. And I think that the seatbelt example is a perfect example. People who only do things because they're required to do it, not because it's safe, not because it's the best, the better policy or better idea, but because they're required to do it. That's the only reason.
I think of people who don't wear masks unless they're forced to in order to go into a store. You're not allowed in the store unless you wear a mask. Okay, then I'll put a mask on.
Right.
Otherwise, so those are free riders.
Right.
Okay.
Then the last group is, this too would be the group that I would fall into. Mm-hmm. And that's the pro-vaccine. I would be fine with taking it.
Right.
Yeah.
And I don't mind it being mandatory. And the reason I don't mind it, you can't punish people for not doing it.
Right.
Okay. That's not something any of us want to see. And how would you punish somebody? I heard a story the other day that Hawaii has a very strict mask policy or social distancing policy, and they are actually fining. One woman got fined because she didn't have a mask on, and I think that's probably not the approach that most of us want to take, is to punish people. You can mandate without punishing.
Yeah, and I guess with that point, I would fall somewhere between either pro-vaccine or the anti-duty, because I'm going to get it, but I don't want it to be mandatory with the idea that if you don't get it, then you're punished, or that there's some negative consequence for not getting it.
The interesting question is going to be with healthcare workers. If you're a nurse or a doctor or a healthcare worker, can you be forced to get the vaccine as a condition of employment?
Right. Yeah, that'll be interesting.
It's a legal question.
Right.
That's going to be settled in the courts. But if you're a teacher, teachers are I would consider teachers frontline workers.
Sure.
Okay, because they're exposed. Can you force a teacher to get the vaccine so that she protects her students? Can you mandate that? Can you make it a condition of employment? That's going to be an interesting question.
Yeah, and I would be, that'll be an interesting. Yeah, it'll be interesting.
Or if you're, like we're psychologists, right? We see people come into our office. Do I have the obligation to get vaccinated so that I protect the people that I see?
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. That'll be an interesting debate. I don't think that anyone should tell anybody else what they have to do with their body, or be in a situation where we punish people for, opting to, have their own choice about what they do with their body.
Right.
But there is that balance with safety and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, that's going to be an interesting argument.
Right. And then the last group, of course, at the other end of you have anti-vaccination at one end of the spectrum, and then way at the other end, you have pro-vaccination. And I guess I would fall into that category where I will volunteer. I will take the vaccine. And I think it should be mandatory for certain people to protect others. Okay. If you're working from home and you're not exposing yourself to anybody, then you don't have to be made to take this. But if you're in a position where you are exposing other people, then maybe you do have an obligation to get vaccinated. And the problem we're talking about here, besides the legal issue of can I be forced to take it, this is about herd immunity. What the vaccine will do is it will accelerate herd immunity. This is a quicker way to get there, and with less loss of life. Okay.
Right. And again, the likelihood of us gaining herd immunity is very small anyways.
Right.
But I think that what we're referring to here with the notion of herd immunity, not that it will eradicate like we try to do with measles or smallpox or something like that. But what we're talking about here is, again, like we do with the flu, is okay, there's enough people who are vaccinated and are quote unquote immune to it during the season or at periods of the year where it's at its highest, that it decreases the toll that it takes on healthcare workers, hospital admissions, and overall deaths, of course.
Right. Yeah, because now this virus can kill. I mean, the yearly flus that we get don't kill most people, except the very, very vulnerable, the very young, the very old. But this is a virus that can kill if you get it. And so that creates it. This isn't just a regular virus. This is a different kind of virus, much more lethal. And so we do have some social obligation to do what we can to protect each other. And one of the ways to do that, vaccination. Herd immunity doesn't mean we're all going to be immune to this. Herd immunity simply means enough of us will be protected that we can manage those who do get it. So there are going to be people who will continue to get the coronavirus, this COVID-19 virus, but the numbers will be small enough that we can manage it. So that's what we're talking about. We're not going to all be immunized to this thing, no matter what we do, any more than we're immunized against any other flu virus.
Absolutely.
Okay? But the problem here is the lethality of this virus. That's what we're concerned about. So we want to get there as quickly as we can, and this virus offers hope. So again, it's like masks, social distancing, washing your hands, and doing the vaccine. So if you combine all these things, we have a better chance of gaining control over this virus, because we now see what happens when it gets out of control, which is what's happening right now around the world.
Absolutely. So we certainly encourage you to check out the articles that we posted, and to just look at the science and appreciate the science for what it is and what it says and what it's telling us. Don't become so inundated with conspiracies or with what the news tries to portray sometimes, that things may not be as open and as forthcoming as they really are. We get into those scenarios where we become overly anxious because we're listening to news outlets that are really just disseminating fear. So, really think about that and look at what is in your best interest, what is in your family's best interest, and what is in, your society's best
community. Right. Exactly. Mm-hmm.
So,
right.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, we have that obligation they're to each other, to keep each other as safe as possible.
Right.
So, yeah, as you work through this, because it's a very personal decision and it's a family decision, okay? But as you work through it, you have to make a decision at some point.
Right.
All of us are going to make a decision. The important issue is, what evidence do you use to make your decision?
Mm-hmm.
And what we're saying is, if you think back to that first article, what we're saying is, boy, the science is pretty clear on this one. I mean, this is rigorous science done by thousands and thousands and thousands of people. They can't all be in on the lie. I mean, it's just not possible. And so if you're going to make a decision, use the best evidence that you can get. If you have something comparable to the 40,000 people who were tested with this, if you have something as compelling as that, by all means, consider that. I just don't know of anything as compelling as the phase 3 trial that was undertaken with this drug. I mean, I don't have anything else that has that kind of evidence. And so the science is saying this. I don't know of anything other than that I would rely on.
Right. Absolutely. So, love the science.
Yeah. Embrace it. Right. It's what we have. It's all that we have to make these kinds of decisions.
Absolutely. So, all right. Well, that is it for today. We'll be back next week and talk about some
holiday cheer.
We'll talk about some more stuff next week.
We'll talk about more things. Right.
So that's it. Until next time, stay happy, stay healthy, and forget to be afraid.